So hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are WorkStream nonprofit, and our goal is to help organizations overcome their operations bottlenecks to impact. So the goal of this series is to give everyone a checklist of things that you should be looking at and thinking about. It is not made for you to become an expert in finance in 30 minutes. That would be something more than we could promise, but it's aimed to give you the things of what you should be looking for operationally to make sure that you have the best financial health. In general, we believe very much that if people have the right knowledge and the right accountability and the right team, they are able to accomplish almost anything. So that is why we offer these. We also do offer financial management support if you would need it. And really, if you have any questions about anything regarding how your organization is running, that is what we are here for. We are a nonprofit made to serve nonprofits, and that is our mission. So with that, first, a big thank you to our sponsor for this event is Ramp. If you are not on Ramp, you should be. It is probably my favorite recommended financial tool to use. They do great expense management, bank accounts. They have really good interest on the money that you have just sitting there. So we've seen people earning hundreds of dollars a year just from having their money in Ramp. But for expense management, it just makes life so much easier. So if you're curious about how Ramp can do it, I'm happy to act as their salesperson because I really do love it. And we thank them for their partnership with this. Jay, I will let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Jay from PEPR, and happy to be joining you all and working with WorkStream and Deena and the team here. So PEPR is what we would call an organizational effectiveness organization, and we're working primarily in the farmed animal space. And we're helping organizations just be more effective, build kind of rigorous operations, and really position themselves to scale and grow and drive more impact. I am a HR person, but a big chunk of our team is delivering finance support. So not kind of dissimilar to WorkStream. We kind of slot teams in to provide services, and also have some kind of program offering as well. But yeah, excited to be here and share kind of some of the learnings that we have and some of the ways that we're seeing organizations get stronger when it comes to financial management.
You've done a lot of good work in this space, and we love working with you. So thank you for that. Now, hopefully everybody sees the message that is pinned, the copy of the checklist. If you have it, if everyone can see that, you're going to be working off of it because, as we talked about, we want this to be actionable. We want you to have a checklist that you are then walking away with. So make sure to open that and reference it as we go along. If you have any issues or questions, let me know, put them in the chat. At the end of this at 12:30 Eastern, we will start a Q&A. So if you can hold your questions to that, or you can put them in the chat and we'll get to them at that point in time. Alrighty, so what we're going to be covering is financial health, what you need to be thinking about. The common problem I get is that people don't even know what they should be looking at, and you cannot be in compliance and doing things right if you don't even know what you're supposed to be looking for. So that's what we're hoping to guide you through. We'll look at budgeting, your cash flow and runway, financial governance, your audit readiness. A general rule of thumb I use is that we always want you to be audit ready. And a lot of that, again, is knowing what you need to be doing in order to be audit ready. Payroll, payments, cost and revenue categorization. We get that a lot, especially with grant allocation and tracking, and growth readiness and the partners that you're bringing within that. So without further ado, let us dive into our content. All right, so budgeting. We have cash flow and runway and budgeting. Jay, I'm going to let you walk through these and explain them, what people should be looking at, what they should be thinking about as you go through them.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess if we kick off with budgeting, when we're working with organizations, we're really trying to make sure they have quite a rigorous budget cycle, actually being clear what point in the calendar they're going to be building their budget, and obviously thinking about how that leads into needing that information for the board conversation or for fundraising. So yeah, we're really thinking about what the right moment is in the calendar year to do
Yeah,
that.
I often compare the finances to like the blood of the organization. You might have program work, but the money is what's underlying it all. So when are you thinking about the budget, and when is your fiscal year starting, and when do you have to be doing that?
Yeah, and it's really a strategic tool. So, it's
Mhm.
sometimes budget feels like an afterthought, but actually it's leading into how you're going to actually operationalize everything that you're intending to do. So, yeah, super critical to think about the right moment to do that and how all of your strategic plans are feeding into it as well.
Mhm. So we want to consider multiple budget scenarios. Do you want to explain how you look at that, Jay?
Yeah, definitely really critical to do this. We often look at it almost kind of like what's the baseline, current team, current expenses that we know will kind of continue. And then, of course, if you're thinking about expanding programs, bringing in new program areas, thinking about the cost specifically associated with that. And then that obviously feeds into specific asks you might have as you go fundraising as well to deliver that work. So, yes, it might be we need to add in an extra role to do something, but that role probably has travel and expenses related to it as well. There may be new systems or other kind of program related expenses as well. So being able to kind of clearly carve that out, and also looking at what growth might we be having. So again, the baseline is that kind of continuing what we have, but also what happens if we receive, more funding than we intended, or we have some kind of growth that wasn't
Mhm.
anticipated. So what could
You,
those scenarios look
yeah,
like?
you can't get money you don't ask for. So this is why it's really important to have those multiple scenarios. I've had people and they're like, well, I'm just not paying myself, so therefore we have enough money. I'm like, no, maybe you should be putting in the budget what it would look like if you would be paying yourself more. So we want to have those scenarios. And as Jay said, that goes into our further point about it's aligning with your explicitly to your strategic priorities, not just taking a look at what you did last year, although what you did last year is important. We want to make sure that it's part of your strategy and part of your funding requests. Now, a lot of the times we get the questions about overhead costs, and that also ties into the restricted and unrestricted funds. So people don't know how to allocate them, how much is overhead, how much is not, what if it's restricted or unrestricted? What does that mean? What do we do with that? Jay, what would be your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think being super clear on the, basically the permissions around the funding, you've got to know that as well as you not so much just build out the budget, but sort of also manage the costs on an ongoing basis. And I know we'll come more onto that, but yeah, being super clear about what that funding unlocks, and then how you're kind of tracking and allocating your costs towards that, is a big, really important piece that we help teams navigate as well. Yes,
Like
knowing,
if you
not all funding goes into one pot, right? And you work from that, there's going to be different
Yeah.
parameters.
Usually, for example, for like management salaries, it's not that 100% of their salaries in management and therefore operations. Usually 50% of that is on direct program expenses, and that should be captured in that budget of that program because without that 50% of that management, you would not be able to do the program effectively. So it's helpful because it gives you a good sense of what your actual costs are to run every program. And also when you're fundraising, we want to make sure that you have the different categories and you're asking for the amount that's going to cover you. And it's not just lumped into overhead because funders may be hesitant to think to want to just be funding overhead. They like
Yeah, I think it's
funding.
a good point, how you allocate your costs across different functional areas or programs. And also that's where time tracking obviously comes in quite useful if you want to be allocating,
Yeah,
accurate time against those.
yeah. Okay, so then moving on to cash flow and runaway. So looks like your suggestion is an operating reserve of 6 to 12 months.
Or as much as possible, yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously. But yeah, obviously thinking strategically about how you build that cash runway is going to just give you options to make decisions around the team about expenses that you might take on. And also, you don't always necessarily know when grant renewals might actually flow through. So you need to be able to weather any kind of storm there. Funder priorities might change, right? Which could also cause a challenge there. So any kind of cash reserve is going to help you navigate that, and having as much as possible, at least 6 to 12 months, will allow for that.
And then you also want to be monitoring your cash flow projections and actuals to your budget. Like, how are you actually doing? Budget should be pretty accurate. And sometimes you have some cash crunch points that, let's say you're hosting an event and that's going to be a third of your budget, and how much money you're going to need there. So those cash flow points are really important for you to be thinking about. So do you know what these are? Can you pinpoint them? Um, Jay, would you have any tips about the actually comparing the actuals to budgets?
Yeah, I mean, I would say do that as frequently as possible, really, because looking at your actual expenditure and what that means for your cash flow, um, even the most kind of well-funded organizations could come into a cash flow challenge if they're not looking at how expenditure and funding basically coming in is balancing each other. So
Yeah.
it's really something like it's an ongoing skill, honestly, to continue to look at this and be projecting like where we might have future obstacles that we already need to be planning for, what we might need to slow down, delay, where we might need to ask for something to happen sooner than maybe we anticipated. So yeah, it's really I think, a skill for teams to develop to look at that.
Yeah, it's really, really important to be doing that. And if you don't know how to do this, again, reach out for help. We're both here to support. We're more than happy to do that. You also want to have that strategy for investing excess cash. If you have a $3 million budget and you have 6 to 12 months reserves, you should be earning money on it, whether it's sitting in an interest-bearing savings account or something, have some kind of strategy. You will have to get your financial investment policy approved by your board. So again, I have a template for that if anybody needs that. But we want your money to work for you. This is an often overlooked area of income. And as well with our scenarios, like think about what would happen. We are all affected by US aid and all the government cuts. So what happens if you lose money? And that goes back to our multiple budget scenarios. And at what point do we think about doing something different? So all things to just think about. What are those? Jot them down, think about it. This will allow you to be more strategic. All righty. Then we move into everyone's favorite parts, financial governance and audit readiness. You should be audit ready at every point in time. That means maintaining thorough financial documentation and paper trails. Are you doing that? QuickBooks, Xero, they all let you attach things. Do you know what the audit thresholds are? That means multiple states. We can get into that more. You need somebody who's monitoring all of it and make sure that your bookkeeping team is really on top of that. This is how we view audit readiness. Jay, what would you talk about audit readiness? What do you think about?
Yeah, I think you hit on kind of the main things there. And obviously, just as organizations grow, the complexity just gets more complex. So how are you having a plan for that and making sure that, again, you're just looking ahead, similar to what we're saying with the budget and the cash flow. Our organization is growing, things are getting more complex, planning ahead for that. We're now fundraising in a new state. We're going to maybe hit a threshold this year from donations that we hadn't anticipated, and that starts to really change the dynamics of what you need to manage. So yeah, just being very proactive and not being left in a situation where you've got to react to those requirements.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons why we brought Beth on. Beth is wonderful, but there are so many things to think about with compliance. Like we talk about the United States, but there are 50 different states with 50 different sets of rules, or I think 37 sets of rules really, about when do you need to file and when do you need an audit and what's the donation threshold and what you have to do if there's an employee. So Beth knows all that on our team. Make sure you have somebody on your team who knows for your states and is thinking about it. We don't want too many people thinking about it. It can be just an onerous responsibility, but we want to make sure that you are in compliance at all times. And then financial governance. This is another one people aren't thinking about, but it's really all about setting the rules in place for what does your organization do and sticking to them. So Jay, I'll let you talk more about those.
Yeah, definitely. I think outlining those policies that you need, obviously this it goes hand in hand really with the audit readiness, because that will tell you a lot of the things that you need to be building into policy and process. But yeah, really just thinking about how you operate internally. So who has sign-off approvals for expenses, that kind of thing. I think Deena, you already spoke to how you're tracking everything. We definitely like to see organizations have everything in QuickBooks. Again, Ramp is another great platform for managing expenses and travel policies and approvals and things. So having all of that infrastructure is really critical and just makes life easier if you're doing it in small chunks going along, rather than having to do some kind of big cleanup. Yeah, and just continually looking at these policies again as organizations grow, they get more complex. What worked for you at this stage probably isn't going to be working for you as you hit some of those kind of other thresholds of complexity. So how do you have in those kind of review steps and continually not just review from policy changes, but also process changes to make sure that those things are working for you and you're not kind of sticking with historical ways of working because that's what we've always done, but really trying to rethink how you do it more effectively.
Yeah. I was just working on an employee handbook for a client, and I made sure to put in all of these like expense policies and what are we doing and how it works. And somebody wise told us recently, it was a great line, is that make sure every policy that you use is something that you can implement and that you can enforce. It has to be 100% enforceable. But thinking about what it works, what are the norms? How does your organization operate? And like the financial policy for investment, you want to make sure that you have that for all the money coming in so that you're constantly audit readiness and in a great state of financial governance. All right, let me move into payroll and payments. This section probably has the most questions of anything that I see. I don't know if this is where you're seeing most of your questions from people coming on. Payroll, payments, cost and revenue categorization. There's so much to talk about in here. Let's talk about payroll first, because I can talk about that for a long time. I won't. But you start, Jay.
Yeah, well, obviously payroll and getting people paid is a lot of complexity to manage, especially again, people in different states, different countries, and all other kind of complexity. And how you're approaching that and staying compliant, obviously, is super critical. We help a lot of organizations navigate, do we run our own payroll? Do we look at something called an EOR, employer of record solution? Do we look at a PEO, which is a co-employment solution? And we'll honestly try and navigate as much as possible clients towards a PEO setup because it's just lifting a lot of the compliance of the organization, especially if you're hiring in multiple states. So yeah, just
Multiple
thinking,
countries. Yeah.
yeah, the EOR for kind of across borders, but
Mhm.
important to think about what's the right setup for you. Of course, these all have different costs and investment in doing it, but it's balancing up, is it a good use of someone's time on your team to have to figure these things out and manage that, or is it better to use one of these providers that really will lift like 90% of the compliance stuff that needs to happen from your plate? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really a big piece around like that
And
setup to
when
consider.
Yeah, when you're deciding to hire somebody, it is really important to determine whether or not they are a contractor or an employee. I see so many people going wrong here because they want to take the easy method, which is just pay somebody as a contractor, but you may not be in compliance with state labor laws. I had one client who, after 41 years of operations, they were audited by the IRS because they had never paid anybody as a W-2. Um, we don't want anybody in that situation. So when I hear of an executive director not being a W-2, that's a red flag. So yes, it is more challenging to do that, and you do have to register in each state. People with multi-stated, it's more complicated. Those things are made easier by using the PEOs, like things like Gusto, JustWorks. All those things help you solve all those problems. Um, but compensation isn't just the salary, it's the health benefits, the paid time off, the retirement contributions, if you're doing that. In Maryland, for example, you have to be registered with the option for people to do that. You don't have to contribute as an employer, but people have to be able to save. So you have to decide, like, what is your compensation philosophy? What's your organizational values? Like, how do you want people to feel and think about it? And a lot of people will say, well, we're a nonprofit, so we shouldn't be paying much. But I don't know. Personally, I disagree. It's like people are people and they need to get paid well for what they do. So build that into your budget. If I could pay everybody well, what would that alternate scenario look like? And again, Ramp is a really great tool for managing payments. And I really do love Ramp. And then we get into cost and revenue categorization. That's a whole separate category of things about this is really grant tracking and the expenses. I know my methodology is that we like to have the budgets that we're creating match the chart of accounts in QuickBooks, and then we usually use classes to then define what the grants are. Um, but there's a lot more complication that goes into that. And Jay, I'll let you talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think our team works in a very similar way, and just making sure that the chart of accounts kind of matches the way that the organization's working, and building in, I think thinking about the different stakeholders that you're going to need to report any financial information to. So yes, thinking about what your accountant's going to use for any filings, but also thinking about what you need for a grant report. So right, using those classes, projects in QuickBooks is going to help you cut the data and kind of isolate what you need by view in that case. Also what you might present to the board. So thinking about, yeah, just the different ways you're categorizing, the kind of different audiences that you need to communicate to, what kind of narrative you need to provide them with the numbers as well, does take a lot of thinking through and actually setting up that structure. But once it's set up, it should really work for you. And then as you add in a new program, you think about how we're adding that in and making the right cuts in the way that we handle the data.
Yeah, and as we talked about, everything should be in a state of audit readiness. Then everything should be in a state of reporting ready. And then when you need to do your grant reports or your board reports, the information is there because you've already thought that through. So it may take a little more on the setup side, but then implementation is much easier. You save yourself a lot of time there.
Yeah, and if anybody doesn't have a system in place yet to manage this, obviously making sure you've got, I'm sure everyone here has already got like a QuickBooks or a Xero or something, but obviously as organizations start out, they might manage everything in a spreadsheet, but that's only sustainable for a short period of time.
Yeah, and you don't want to make the mistake of doing a spreadsheet for 4 years and now you have to catch up on 4 years of bookkeeping. I've seen that too. Just do it right from the beginning.
Yeah, I think the thing is any quick wins, right, in any areas that we do in ops always has like a downward effect that we have to then probably clean up and is going to cost more in the long run. So
Yeah. Which goes straight into really our partners, because if you don't have the skills or expertise to do that, bring people in. And there are a lot of people out there. I know we're able to help, PEPR's able to help. There's a lot of great resources that can support you. So you want to bring those in. You want to see who you need to train in your organization, who can partner with you, and take a look at all the different providers out there, especially in the financial world. There are a lot of them, and both Jay and I would be happy to help you navigate through those. Jay, would you have any other thoughts on that?
no, totally agree. There's lots of options out there, but I think sometimes figuring out the right option and then the right partner is something we help organizations on all the time. And I think I kind of already talked to the payroll, PEOs, EORs. They're all very different models. They're going to be right for different organizations at different
Yep.
stages. So knowing which one is going to be the best solution for you and honestly the best unlock for what you're trying to achieve. Different ways to look at those, right? I think sometimes, especially with nonprofits, we solely look at things by cost and think everything has to be the lowest cost. But there's often a quality kind of trade there as well. So again, the value that a PEO will offer you versus maybe trying to manage payroll yourself in like 10 states is totally worth it to free up internal capacity. So yeah.
Yes, it is. It is very much worth it. People don't even think about it, but if you're spending 10 hours of time trying to do something and that time is, let's say, average at 40 an hour, that's $400 that you're spending. Whereas the PEO, if you're using something like Gusto, is going to cost you a lot less than that and take off a lot more headache, which leads into growth readiness. Also, you cannot do everything. And especially as you grow, you can't do everything. You're going to have to delegate. You're going to have to automate. You need to have functions and capacity that's going to match the organization's growth. And you want to have those systems in place before you get to the point where things are starting to break. So when you were thinking about growth readiness, which is always my mindset, the question is, what do you have now and what's going to need to change if you double in size, if you get 3 more employees, if you operate in 2 more states? You're thinking about like what happens also is that if we get new leadership or somebody takes a job somewhere else, how could that impact our financial stability, and what steps can we make sure to put that into place so that way we don't have any challenges coming up. Now, a lot of some grantors I've seen have started asking about succession plans, but we want to make sure that all the financial information just isn't in someone's head and their own personal passwords, and ensuring that your finance and operations functions are matching. So really think about it from a growth mindset. I like people to think from a growth mindset, not from a scarcity mindset, which goes back into being cheap. Don't be cheap. Think about prosperity. Jay, what would you add on to that?
Say yeah, maybe cost conscious rather than cheap, but yeah. But yes, letting that hold you back from investing. I think it goes for both these areas, growth readiness and partners, right? You need to know when to invest to strengthen your organization and allow it to scale. And yeah, being always thinking again, looking ahead, like with the budget, with the cash flow, growth readiness should be part of that as well. Like, how might our team need to evolve? Ultimately, kind of what got you here might not be what gets you here, like where you need to go. So there's lots of things to factor in. Internal transitions take time, whether it's a new system, whether it's bringing in new capabilities to the team, whether it's changing the organizational structure as you evolve as well. All more complex and all take more time than we ever anticipate. So yeah, ultimately going through growth is going through a change, and that has kind of different costs on the organization as well. But
Yeah, we want you to be ready for it, but also don't grow too fast. Like you don't need a software like deal or overkill or spending too much money on it. So don't say that Jay and Deena said that we needed to be growth ready. So now I'm going to spend a ton of money in here. Be thoughtful about what you need to do and make sure it's an investment that pays off for where you are.
yeah.
All right. So that was most of the stuff on our checklist. Coming up, we have Sarah Goodman with Offutt Kerman talking about compliance. I know everyone's favorite topic also, but thinking about it from HR and just legal and what we need to be thinking about. Kristen Berger with HR, Leon Seaman with operations, and Jessica DeVito with fundraising. So if you're on here, you're signed up already, so you'll get email notifications, but please share. We hope this is a good exercise for people to join, to gain the knowledge, gain that checklist, and be able to make your operations healthier and stronger. And with that, I am going to put out a poll, if you don't mind, just filling in some questions for our quality control of how we can do better for you, and how you found this webinar. This would be very helpful. We want to know what helped you the most, what helped you the most. And thank you all for joining, and Jay for great content. And now we will move into the Q&A. If anybody has any questions, we are all yours. I'll start with a question, Jay. Oh, here. Laura asks, could you explain the board approval policies for executive spending and new hires? Is that to avoid inequity pay? That's a good question. Jay, do you want to answer that one? You want me to take that one?
You can take it and then I can add to it. Yeah.
So the way I see it is, as a nonprofit, you are obligated to make sure that your spending is for the public benefit and not for personal gain. So when we have the approval policy for executive spending, we want to make sure that everything that they're spending is for the public good. Now, the question is that the travel? Is that incidentals? Like, what do we want to do to support this person? Often executives will have higher expenditures. So what are those policies? What do they look like? And are we thinking about it instead of just allowing them to pay? New hires, again, it's our compensation theory. It's what are we thinking about in terms of how do we compensate? Usually the board doesn't need to approve every new hire, just the executive director does. But the board does need to approve the executive director hire also for that transparency in there. And really, it depends on your compensation model.
Yeah, I would say obviously the board role there is to make sure that compensation is reasonable, and as much as possible benchmarked to evidence that it's reasonable. And then yeah, ideally the board shouldn't need to be approving the salaries of everyone in the team, because the executive director should have that's their role, is to run the operations of the organization and should be working within the kind of agreed budget that the board would have signed off.
If you do have your board involved in everyone's hires, I would say that you probably have a two involved board, and we should go back to our last session about boards will probably be very helpful. We want to keep them at a strategic level. Okay. Follow-up question. Would the board approve a salary scale at the beginning?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's a compensation philosophy. So that could be definitely something that the board approves.
Yeah, and that's something you should be trying to build anyway, right? Having a good sense of if we're hiring a manager level role, the range that we would pay would be between this. So
Yeah,
you
it's
want to
something you
have
should figure out, not like how much will this person take minimum to do the job, is what is our compensation and benchmark and doing those and looking at total compensation, which includes the insurance and any other benefits they might have. Okay, next question. Any suggestions of how to use QuickBooks more effectively to separate or track grant spending when you run out of classes and don't want to bump up to the next level? I haven't seen running out of classes unless you're on the cheaper version of QuickBooks. So you may just need to pay for the more expensive version. If you don't already have it, if you're a US organization, TechSoup offers QuickBooks for $80 a year. Just they don't let you convert an existing account, so it gets annoying to transition over. But it's $80 a year and you get all the features that you need. We had a client who was unhappy with QuickBooks because they couldn't do all of this. And then we're like, oh, you just need to pay for the next level. And guess what? You can get that from TechSoup, and that solved all their problems. So again, don't be cheap. The issue with TechSoup. Is that because you're not a US organization, or is that because you need to convert? Oh, no, you should definitely do TechSoup. That's pretty much our standard methodology. Get TechSoup, get QuickBooks, get it paid for, and you absolutely want to be tracking it properly. And that will be the solution. And we're happy to talk to them if that's an issue, if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
All righty, any other questions? Jay, I would ask a question. Is that what do you see the biggest mistakes organizations are making?
Oh, lack of long-term planning, lack of
Yeah.
long-term planning of strategy, of team needs and how to operationalize the strategy, of how the finances underpins the strategy, the cash flow piece. So yeah, I think we know why, right? It's like we're often dealing with limited resources and don't always necessarily have the funding for the long-term view either. But yeah, I think lack of planning overall is, and having the time to really invest in the long-term planning is probably the biggest hurdle we see for organizations.
Yeah, I see also people not having the right, like not they're seeing the money as a mechanism to make things happen, but not as intimately integrated with the program. So not thinking of them in connection with each other, not doing the multiple scenarios, just saying this is how much money we have. So what can we get for that? It should be, this is what we're trying to do. How much is it going to cost? And then how do I get that? So it'd probably be the biggest thing that I'm saying. Also get help, get guidance early on. There's a lot of people willing to give you free advice. Reach out. You don't need to be an expert in everything. All right, next question. Do you have any guidance or suggestions for further learning about best practices for tracking expenses and cash flow, where allocation may need to happen retroactively, like when grant money comes in after the costs were incurred? That's more of a tricky question. Jay, do you want to try?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one. I guess if you don't have a system to track it, you've got that Excel sheet that's tracking as much of those costs as possible. So you've got the history there.
We hope you have been doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If not, like when we come in, if we need to clean up QuickBooks, we'll go back historically But I think the question also is if the grant money is coming in, was it supposed to retroactively cover or was it only cover it going forward? Because technically, if the grant period is for when it comes in for the following year, you can't take prior incurred costs unless that was explicitly stated. So it sounds like, Jay, what we're both saying is that you need to do your bookkeeping and track expenses as they happen. And if not, you have to go back.
Yeah, and be clear what your to your point, what your funding is covering, what the parameters are.
Yeah, I don't think you can switch things around just to fit because you have a grant that covers it. Make sure it's really something that aligns with what the funder wants you to do. And you can ask them to pay us back retroactively. Just make sure it's clear. Hope that answers your question. Okay, how do you figure out what is an appropriate level of transparency on financial matters with your staff and partners? So it's a good question. I've seen a lot of different methodologies of doing it. Any advice? I've been on the receiving end as a staff member, inconsistent, semi-opaque communication from executives on financial matters led to distrust. So I could definitely see that. What do you recommend, Jay? You probably see a lot more of this than I do.
I think it's all, there's no like formula here for how transparent leadership should be with the team about different things, right? There could be they're working on 10 different grant applications and 3 of them are going to come through, but they just don't know. But also there could be a period of instability they're looking at as a result of that. How much of it do you share? You don't want to cause unnecessary stress for the team. Yeah, it's a tough one because I don't think there's any like correct answer for this. Every organization's culture is different. The sort of relationship between the team and the leadership is different. But obviously, internally, there should be some level of transparency about those things. So yeah, we probably need to dig a bit more into that question to like specific
Yeah, and
examples. But yeah.
Yeah, I've seen organizations take different methodologies. I think it may be more of like establishing a this is how we do things that would give you more knowledge. Like some people want the staff to know everything about the budget, but they won't talk at all about fundraising and what they're doing to support it. Hopefully, the staff has faith in the executives that they're going to be searching for the right funds, but it could also be if you're an executive and you don't want to lose your team and you're really worried about your funds because half your grants didn't get renewed because of all the governmental chaos. That's a hard question for them too.
Yeah.
But I always think over communication and transparency is always better. It's my opinion.
And I think having clear structure where you can. So, for example, if we go back to like team pay, well, having that compensation philosophy, knowing that for this level role, we pay between this, so that people know where they sit within that versus feeling, you know, everyone's being paid based on what they negotiated. Like that obviously creates quite a lot of distrust and feeling of kind of disparity across everyone. So, as much as possible, again, yeah, having that structure around this is what we pay. These are the kind of expense limits. Here's the approval process. Here's who makes decisions in these different scenarios. It all helps to kind of build that culture.
And in total compensation, you should be thinking about other things that you might be giving them too. Like if you're giving them coaching benefits or I don't know, office equipment or things like that. Again, equipment, if it's more expensive, might be considered an asset, and then we get into more challenges because we can't have public benefit. But think about what your compensation packages look like. Jay, I'm sure you've created, especially with your HR background, compensation packages. How would you recommend people like starting off thinking about those?
Yeah, I mean, we normally have a workshop that we take teams through and we look at that. So we'll kind of get everything on the table around what they are doing. There might be things they offer that aren't actually framed as part of that total reward offer. So like if everyone doesn't work on a Friday, compressed week, all of those kind of things, right? Flexibility, there's pay, there's benefits, there's those other pieces to support in the role, like yeah, any kind of stipends or anything, paid time off, all of those things are part of the total package that people receive. So yeah, we'll typically look at like what you are doing, what the options might be to nudge that forward because you can't do everything for everybody. It's just not feasible. And then also really thinking as well about how does that link with your culture and what does that say about working at the organization? What does it say to people you're trying to attract and bring in as well? Especially when it comes to, things around flexibility. Sometimes nonprofits are of course very restricted in terms of pay options, but there are lots of other mechanisms that you can leverage if you can't offer the most competitive pay options.
Okay. Now, another question I have is that if you are thinking about what the quick wins are, is that thinking about what's going to have the most benefit, reduce risk the most, that's the easiest to put in? Based on the things that we've talked about, what would you tell people to do if they would like walk away with one thing that they need to do?
Oh, I mean, from my perspective, would be the long-term
Your
planning.
perspective.
I think I already talked about it.
Okay. And
Obviously,
you
there's
talked
like a
about that.
ton of compliance
So
things that
everyone go home and do your
non-negotiable.
planning with your finances to make sure that we have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I would also make sure I would do from more the opposite side. It's like make sure you have a really good bookkeeping structure, that you have a software that can do the job that you need to so that you're in audit readiness at all times.
I think the answer is there's not one thing you can do, unfortunately. There's like a whole
There are
bunch
a
of
few
things that
things
you
you
need
need
to
to
do.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's even just that compliance, just make sure you're all in compliance with everything. Because that runs the risk of getting you out of nonprofit status, which we don't want to do that. So, all right. Any other questions? Well, if we have no other questions, and thank you all for filling in the poll. We will end it now. Thank you all for joining. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We're here to support, and good luck. Uh, mhm. We'll send out an email to everybody who joined with both my contact info and Jay's.